Evelyn Carter heard her husband say another woman's name. Not in a letter, not in a rumor carried by neighbors with careful eyes and careful mouths. To her face, in her own house, in front of every person in Harlan County who mattered. "Allow me to introduce my wife," Nathaniel said. "Amelia?" Evelyn was standing 6 feet away. Wearing the ring he had put on her finger, she did not move. She did not speak. She did not give him the satisfaction of watching her break. But across the room, Harrison Caldwell set down his glass and looked at her, and he did not look away. If this story already has your chest tight, subscribe and follow every part to the end. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this travels. The dinner had been Evelyn's idea, not because she wanted to. Not because she believed Nathaniel deserved a welcome. She had done it because his letter had arrived 3 weeks prior, 1 page. No apology, the handwriting of a man who did not consider that he owed her one, and it had said he was bringing a business associate home, and that she ought to arrange something respectable. That was the word he used, respectable. She had stood at the kitchen window reading that word, and she had felt something move through her chest that she did not name. She folded the letter. She put it in the drawer with the unpaid creditor notices, and the mill repair invoice, and the letter from the bank in Richmond that she had been answering. In careful, measured language, for 4 months without telling Nathaniel, because Nathaniel had not written in 4 months, and there was no address to write to. Then she went to arrange something respectable. She sent word to Harrison Caldwell's estate, because Harrison Caldwell held 3 of Nathaniel's outstanding debt agreements, and because Evelyn had been the one managing those agreements, and because it was time. She had decided for the man who held the debt to be in the same room as the man who owed it. She invited Judge Abernathy. She invited the Hargroves. She spent 2 days cooking with Bess, their one remaining house girl. 17 years old and quiet and good, and she pressed the dark green dress, the one she had repaired at the left sleeve twice. Once with thread that didn't quite match, and she told herself she would be composed. She would stand at the fireplace, and she would be composed, and she would get through the evening, and then she would know what she was dealing with. She was standing at the fireplace when the door opened. Nathaniel came in first. He was broader than she remembered. Traveling coat, new hat, the easy, self-satisfied walk of a man who had been eating well in Europe while the estate accounts bled out behind him. He looked healthy. He looked rested. He looked like a man who had not thought about her once. Then the woman appeared behind him, young, blonde. A silk traveling coat the color of cream without a single road's worth of dust on it. She was holding Nathaniel's arm the way a woman holds something she has already decided is hers. The room stilled, not the polite pause of a dinner party mid-sentence. The particular silence that falls when something is wrong, and every person in the room knows it, and not one of them knows where to put their hands. Evelyn looked at Nathaniel. Nathaniel looked at his guests. He smiled. "Everyone," he said, in the easy, carrying voice of a man who had rehearsed this and found nothing to be nervous about. "Allow me to introduce my wife." 6 feet away. Wearing his ring, Evelyn did not move. She was aware of her heartbeat not racing. Not crashing, simply present, marking time. She was aware of Bess in the kitchen doorway with a serving dish in both hands. Gone completely still, she was aware of Margaret Hargrove's hand finding her husband's arm. She was aware of Judge Abernathy's mouth opening and closing without producing a sound. And she was aware she could not have said why she noticed it in that particular second of Harrison Caldwell. Across the room, setting down a glass he had not touched, very slowly without making a sound, Nathaniel had not looked at her. That was the thing. He had walked into his own house, the house she had fought to hold. The house she had repaired with money they barely had. The house she had managed and protected and kept alive for 18 months, with nothing but her own 2 hands and her own clear head, and he had announced another woman as his wife. And he had not once looked at the woman already standing in it. It was Amelia who looked at her, The young woman's eyes moved across the room and found Evelyn, and something shifted in them. Not cruelty, not triumph, something more complicated than either. A flicker of uncertainty, Amelia said. And her voice was not the voice of a confident woman. Who is that? Nathaniel turned. For the first time since walking through the door, he looked at his wife. 1 second. Less than 1 second. A man's eyes moving across a face he had woken up next to for 4 years and finding it inconvenient. Then the calculation. She recognized it. She had spent 4 years learning every movement of that face, and she recognized the thing that moved across it now. Not guilt. Not remorse. The rapid practiced construction of a story. That is Mrs. Carter, he said, smoothly, as though he were naming a piece of furniture. My late brother's widow. She has been managing the property in my absence. I'm afraid I neglected to mention her, Amelia. My apologies, he said it the way a man says something he has already decided is true. Evelyn heard her own name turned into a lie in her own house, in front of the county judge, and she felt the words go through her the way cold water goes through fast. Total, leaving nothing untouched. She thought about 4 years. She thought about the wedding ring on her finger. She thought about the document in the county records office, with both their names on it. And she made a decision so fast it felt like it had already been made before she arrived. She walked to the table. She pulled out her chair. She sat down. Welcome home, Mr. Whitmore, she said. Her voice was even. She shook out her napkin and placed it on her lap. Bess, I believe we're ready to begin. Bess stood in the doorway for 3 full seconds. Then she walked forward and began to serve. It was the strangest hour of Evelyn Carter's life. And she had lived through hours that had put everything she had to the test. Nathaniel sat at the head of the table, Amelia at his right. He had moved Evelyn, his actual wife, the woman whose name was on the county document. The woman who had managed every dollar in this house for 18 months to the far end. Near Judge Abernathy, like a chair he needed out of the center of the room. She let him. She ate. She answered questions when they came her way. She asked Margaret Hargrove about her daughter's new baby, because no one else had, and because watching Margaret's face ease with relief at having something ordinary to talk about was one of the only clean things that happened that entire evening. She watched Amelia. She had expected a woman who knew exactly what she was doing. What she saw instead was a young woman who was eating very little, watching the room with anxious gray eyes, and glancing at Nathaniel in a way that did not look like the glancing of someone who felt secure. It was the glancing of someone checking repeatedly that the ground was still there. Something about that made Evelyn feel something she had not expected to feel. Not anger at Amelia. Something colder. Something directed entirely at the man at the head of the table. At the far end, Harrison Caldwell had said almost nothing. He ate with the contained attention of a man who had not come for the food and was not interested in pretending otherwise. Once Evelyn looked up and found him watching her not with pity, not with the idle curiosity of a dinner guest, but with the focused, measuring attention of a man solving a problem he has decided matters. She looked back at her plate. She thought, he sees it. He sees all of it. She did not know yet whether that was good or dangerous or both. The women stayed in the sitting room while the men went to the study. Evelyn sat with Margaret Hargrove and let the conversation about Richmond fabric prices move around her, like water around a rock, and she held her hands loose in her lap and she breathed. And she did not think about what was being said in the next room. And she did not think about the look on Nathaniel's face when he turned and saw her. And she thought instead about the county records office and what a woman could do in this state with the right document and the right understanding of the law. The door opened. Amelia stood in the doorway. She stood there for a moment, looking at Evelyn. Then she crossed the room and sat in the chair beside her, not across. Beside the way a woman sits when she has made a decision she isn't certain about and needs to commit before she loses her nerve. Mrs. Carter, she said. Miss Evelyn said. Amelia's hands were in her lap. She was turning a ring on her right hand, not her left. A family piece. Old, he told me you were dead, Amelia said. The room around them, Margaret Hargrove, the low fire. The ordinary sitting room of an ordinary Kentucky house went very far away. He told me, Amelia continued, her voice barely holding its shape, that his wife passed 3 years ago, that he had been grieving, that the estate was entirely his own, entirely settled, that there was no one here. A silence. He told me my father had agreed to the settlement, that papers were signed. And have you seen those papers? Evelyn asked. The pause before Amelia's answer was its own answer. He said they were with his solicitor in Richmond. Evelyn looked at her. 22, maybe. A cream traveling coat and a family ring on her right hand and gray eyes that were working very hard to hold themselves steady. Miss Evelyn said carefully, What is your family name? Fairfield, Amelia said. My father is Robert Fairfield, the tobacco merchant. Evelyn kept her face still. She knew the Fairfield name. She knew it because 8 months ago, going through the estate correspondence trying to locate creditors, she had found a letter from a Richmond firm mentioning Fairfield tobacco interests in connection with a land arrangement that had collapsed. She had not understood all of it then. She understood considerably more of it now. He chose you, Evelyn said slowly, thinking it through as she said it, because he believed your family would provide capital against the estate's debts. Amelia flinched barely. But Evelyn saw it. And your father, Evelyn said. Has he communicated with you since you left? Another pause. Longer this time. He wrote me one letter, Amelia said. Before I left. It said she stopped, pressed her lips together. Tried again. It said that I should be very certain. That he could not promise anything after. Evelyn sat with that for a moment. He disowned you, she said quietly. Before you even arrived, Amelia looked at the far wall. I believed Nathaniel, she said. He was very certain. He made it all sound very settled. He is very good at that, Evelyn said. And then, because it was true, and because this girl deserved one true thing in this evening, full of constructed ones, he convinced me too, once. Amelia turned and looked at her. What do we do? She asked. Evelyn looked at her, this girl who had come to Kentucky with everything she had, and found nothing she had been promised, and she said, You let me handle Nathaniel. And you stay close to the house tonight. Why? Because Evelyn said, when men discover they have lost a game they thought they were winning, they do not always behave well. The men came out of the study 50 minutes later. Harrison Caldwell came first. He crossed the sitting room with his hat already in his hand and his coat already buttoned. The movement of a man who has concluded his business and is not interested in extending the evening. But he stopped in front of Evelyn, and she stood, and he looked at her with that same careful, precise attention he had been giving her all night. Mrs. Carter, he said. Mr. Caldwell, I understand you've been managing the estate accounts in Mr. Whitmore's absence. I have. For how long? 18 months. Something sharpened behind his eyes. And you're familiar, he said, very carefully, with the current state of those accounts. She met his gaze without flinching. Intimately, she said. He was quiet for one moment. Then, I'll be in my office Thursday morning. If you find reason to discuss the estate's financial position with someone who has cause to understand it, I would not be unwilling to listen. It was said quietly, without performance, a practical offer from a practical man who had done a calculation and arrived at a result he was prepared to act on. I'll consider it, she said. He nodded, put his hat on, walked out. Nathaniel came out of the study 30 seconds later. His easy confidence from earlier in the evening had acquired a new texture. Something tighter, something that was recalculating. He crossed the room toward Evelyn. She did not step back. We should speak privately, he said, his voice low. We will, she said. After the guests have gone, he looked at her. searching her face for something: anger, tears, the readable distress of a woman he could manage. He found none of it. He stepped back. The guests left in ones and twos. Judge Abernathy pressed her hand on his way out and said nothing, which she respected more than anything he could have said. Margaret Hargrove pulled her into a brief, tight embrace, which Evelyn had not expected, and which nearly unmade her the simple human warmth of it. The fact that someone had seen, but she held herself together. And she thanked them, and she watched the last carriage disappear down the drive. She went inside. Nathaniel was waiting in the sitting room, arms crossed, back to the fireplace, the posture of a man who has prepared several things to say and is ready to say them. "I can explain you told her I was dead," Evelyn said. Not a question, not an accusation, a fact stated the way facts are stated. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. "I told her you were a dependent." "There's a difference," she says. "Dead. There may have been some Nathaniel." She said his name like closing a door. "I am not interested in your version of events tonight. I am interested in one thing." She looked at him without heat, without trembling, without any of the things he had probably expected. "The estate documents. The property transfer agreements your father drew up when we married. I want copies." The color shifted in his face, something he had not prepared for. "They're with the solicitor. In Richmond," she said. "Yes, everything seems to be in Richmond." A pause. "I'll be requesting them directly. Good night." Nathaniel. She walked upstairs. She sat on the edge of the bed she had made that morning, with the same careful hands she used every morning, in the dark, without lighting the lamp, and she pressed her palms flat against her knees, and she breathed through it, all of it. The whole evening, the weight of it, until the shaking in her chest settled into something she could carry. She did not cry. She thought about Thursday. She thought about Harrison Caldwell's office, and the way he had said the word "listen" not as charity, as a man who had done a calculation. She thought about Amelia Fairfield downstairs, alone in a house that was not what she had been promised. She thought about the county records office, which opened at 8. A name on a document was a thing. A documented name was a weapon. And the man downstairs had made a catastrophic error tonight, not the public humiliation, not the lie, not even the other woman. His error was this: he had done it in front of witnesses. She was at the records office when Dawes unlocked the door. He said good morning without looking up. He went to find what she asked for without asking why she wanted it. He came back with the marriage document, both names, both signatures, the date, the officiating minister. 2 witnesses, and she stood at the counter and read it twice, and then asked for a copy, which was her legal right, and she waited while he made it. She folded it, placed it inside her coat, close against her side. She walked out into the morning, and she thought, 1. Thursday came cold and clear. She wore the gray dress, plainer than the green, better structured, all original buttons. She put her hair up simply. She took the leather case she used for estate documents and placed inside it the marriage record copy, 2 pages of account records she had transcribed from the estate ledgers in her own hand, and a single letter she had drafted the night before and revised 3 times and decided to keep. She walked to town. Harrison Caldwell's office was above the land registry. The rooms communicated, to anyone paying attention, that the man who occupied them felt no need to perform wealth. Good furniture, no ornamentation, maps on the walls, county surveys, state land maps, a rail line map of 3 states with ink marks that meant things she would have had to stand very close to read. A desk that faced the door. He stood when she entered. "Mrs. Carter, Mr. Caldwell." She sat. She placed the leather case on her knees. "Before we begin," she said, "I want to be clear about something." "Go on," he said. "I am not here as Nathaniel Whitmore's wife asking for your patience," she said. "I am here as the operating manager of the Whitmore estate, with 18 months of accounts, to tell you that the representation your investment was made under was false. Not through mismanagement, through deliberate misrepresentation. She held his gaze. Those are two different legal situations. Harrison Caldwell looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached into his drawer and set a ledger on the desk and turned it to face her. She leaned forward and read. She read without speaking. Her eyes moved down the columns, figures she recognized. Figures she didn't. Discrepancies between what Nathaniel had reported and what she knew the estate had actually held. When she reached the third page, she stopped. He told you the Eastern yield was double what it was, she said. He told me the estate could service the debt within 2 seasons. It cannot, she said. It could not when he made that claim. He knew that. She looked up. The mill repair alone consumed 40% of the operating reserve last spring. The remaining liquid assets are less than a quarter of what is represented on that page. His expression had not changed. But his attention, the quality of it, the particular weight of it had shifted. How do you know the exact figures, he said. Because I kept the ledgers, she said. Every entry. 18 months, show me. She opened the case. She set the account records on the desk. She set the marriage document beside them. That document, she said, indicating the marriage record, establishes my legal standing as Nathaniel Whitmore's wife under Kentucky law. The account records establish that I have been the estate's operating manager with full knowledge of its financial obligations. She paused. What they also establish is that the assets used to secure your investment do not exist in the amounts claimed. He picked up the marriage document. He read it. He set it down. He looked at the account records without touching them. Then he looked at her. You knew, he said quietly. Before the dinner. You already knew the estate couldn't service the debt. She did not answer immediately. I knew, she said. And you arranged the dinner anyway. You invited me specifically. A silence. Because you needed a witness, he said. Someone with legal standing and financial interest in the same room when Nathaniel walked through the door. She said nothing. Which was its own answer. Something moved in Harrison Caldwell's face. Not admiration, something more careful than that. The expression of a man who has been underestimating something and has just precisely located the moment at which he stopped. Mrs. Carter, he said, what is it you want? She had prepared this answer. She had turned it over in the dark for 3 nights and discarded 4 versions and settled on the true one. I want what is legally mine, she said, the property rights specified in the original marriage agreement. Legal recognition of my standing as estate manager for the 18 months my husband was absent. And I want the fraudulent debt claims, the ones built on false asset representation, formally documented. She paused. I am not asking you to pursue Nathaniel on my behalf. I am offering you a legal path to recover what you are owed. In exchange for your cooperation in establishing what is mine. Harrison Caldwell was quiet for a long time. Outside the window, the town moved in its ordinary morning way. A cart, a dog, 2 women with baskets, the world entirely unaware of what was being decided in a plain set of rooms above the land registry. You put this together, he said, in 3 days. I put this together, she said. In 18 months. I simply waited for the right moment to use it. He looked at her. And for the first time that morning, for the first time since the dinner, since the moment across the room when he had set down his glass and looked at her face, something shifted in Harrison Caldwell's expression that was not calculation and was not strategy. It was, very plainly, respect. I'll need 3 days to verify the records independently, he said. That's reasonable. And I'll need your full account ledgers. Not copies. She had anticipated this. She opened the leather case. She set the ledger on the desk, the full 18 months. In her handwriting, every entry dated and sourced. I made a copy before I brought it, she said. He almost smiled. Not quite. Thursday week, then, he said. Thursday week, she agreed. She stood. She gathered what she had not left, every copy. Every document, her own correspondence, leaving only the originals she had decided to leave, and nothing she had not. Old habit. The habit of a woman who had learned early that a document left in the wrong hands had a way of becoming unavailable when it mattered most. She put the leather case under her arm. "Mrs. Carter," he said. She paused at the door. "You stayed," he said, "for 18 months. Managing accounts and creditors and a failing estate. Knowing it couldn't hold." Why? She looked at the door. At the grain in the wood. At the ordinary fact of a door in a plain office above a land registry on a clear Thursday morning. "Because I am not the kind of woman," she said, "who leaves a thing she built." She looked back at him. "But I have revised my understanding of what was worth building." She walked out. She went down the stairs and into the street, and she did not look back. And she walked the mile and a half home, with the leather case under her arm, and the copy of the marriage document pressed against her outside, and the full weight of what she had just set in motion moving through her with every step. Not fear. Something steadier than both. She had waited 4 years to understand what she was dealing with. Now she understood. Now she could begin. 3 days passed. Evelyn kept herself busy, the way she always kept herself busy, with purpose. With precision, with the particular discipline of a woman who has learned that idle hands produce idle thoughts, and idle thoughts in a house like this one could undo a person entirely. She rose before dawn. She went through the estate ledgers again, not because she didn't know them. She knew every figure in them, the way she knew her own handwriting, but because she needed to understand what Nathaniel would do next. A man like Nathaniel did not absorb a loss quietly. He reframed it. He reconstructed it. He found an angle that made the thing that had happened into a thing that had happened to him. She needed to be 3 steps ahead of whatever angle he was currently constructing. Amelia stayed in the guest room and came down for meals and said very little. Nathaniel moved through the house like a man who had not yet decided which version of himself to be. Evelyn watched him without appearing to watch him. The way she had learned to do over 4 years of living with someone who performed differently, depending on whether he thought he was observed. At breakfast he was careful, with Amelia attentive, in the deliberate way of a man maintaining an investment he was not yet ready to abandon. At dinner he drank more than he ate and looked at Evelyn with the particular expression of a man trying to locate the threat and not quite finding it. Good, she thought. Let him look. It was on the second day that Bess came to her in the kitchen with her eyes down and her voice low and said that she had overheard something. Evelyn set down the account ledger she was reviewing. "Tell me," she said. Bess twisted her apron in both hands. "Mr. Whitmore was in the study last night, after midnight. He was on the correspondence. I heard him through the door. I didn't mean to listen, ma'am. I only came down for water, and the light was on under the door, and I heard him say." She stopped. "Bess," Evelyn said quietly, "whatever you heard, you did right to tell me." Bess looked up. "He said the estate was his sole property. He said it to someone on correspondence. I think he was dictating to himself. Writing it out, practicing what to say. He said there was no encumbrance of record. He said the wife had abandoned the property." She paused. "He said it 3 times, ma'am, like he was making sure the words were right." Evelyn was very still. "Abandoned, not deceased this time. He had tried deceased with Amelia and it had not held. So now it was abandoned. The wife had abandoned the property. A woman who abandons her husband's estate has no legal claim to it. A woman who was simply absent, who simply left, is a very different legal problem than a woman who is standing in the house with the marriage document in her coat pocket." He was rewriting the story again, and he was doing it on paper this time. "Thank you, Bess," she said. "You did right." She went upstairs and she sat at the small writing desk and she wrote
to
a solicitor she had dealt with twice on estate matters. A man named Grayfield who was thorough and not easily intimidated. And one to the witnesses listed on the marriage document. The one who was still in the county, a former neighbor named Thomas Eccles, who had been at her wedding, and who she was fairly certain could be relied upon to remember it. She sealed both letters and sent Bess into town with them before Nathaniel was out of bed. Then she waited for Thursday. Thursday came and went. She met with Harrison Caldwell in his office for 40 minutes. He had verified the account records independently. She had expected no less from a man like him. He set his own figures beside hers on the desk, and they matched in the places she had said they would match and diverged in the places she had told him they would diverge. And when he looked at her across the desk, there was something in his face that was close to the expression a man makes when a theory he tested has come back proved. He falsified the yield reports, Harrison said. The ones he gave the investment firm in Lexington. Yes, Evelyn said. Before he left for Europe. Yes, which means he knew the estate couldn't hold the debt before he borrowed against it. He knew, she said. He went to Europe to avoid being present when it became impossible to ignore. A pause. And left you, Harrison said, to manage the consequences. She did not answer that. There was no answer worth giving. The facts were the facts, and the facts were already on the desk between them, and sentiment about them was not what either of them was there for. There's something else, she said. She told him about Bess. About the letter Nathaniel had been drafting. About the word abandoned. Harrison was quiet for a moment. Then he said he's going to file a formal claim. Estate sole ownership, wife absent and unaccounted for. If he files it before you can establish legal contest. I know, she said. How long do you have? Grayfield thinks 10 days. If Nathaniel moves quickly, possibly 7. Harrison looked at the desk. Looked at the figures. Made a decision the way she was coming to understand he made decisions without drama. Without announcement, simply by arriving at it and moving forward. I'll file the debt claim formally this week, he said. That puts a legal encumbrance on the estate before he can clear title. He can't claim sole unencumbered ownership with my debt registered against it. He looked at her. It gives you time. She looked at him. She had not asked him for that. She had given him information, and he had drawn a conclusion and acted on it. And the conclusion he had drawn was in her favor, and she was not entirely certain what to do with that. Why? She said. He looked at her steadily, because a man who falsifies yield records to borrow money against an estate he knows is failing and then leaves his wife alone to manage the consequences for 18 months is not a man who's legal. Claims I'm inclined to support. He picked up his pen. And because the account records you've given me are worth more in a contested proceeding than anything Nathaniel Whitmore currently has to offer. Practical. She told herself. It was entirely practical. She believed that. Mostly. Thursday week, she said. As agreed. Thursday week, he said. She left. She came home to find Nathaniel in the front hall waiting for her. He knew where she had been. She could see it in his face, the tight, calculating look of a man who has been thinking and not liking what he found at the end of his thinking. You went to Caldwell, he said. I had a prior arrangement, she said. And moved past him toward the study. He stepped in front of her. This was new. In 4 years of marriage, Nathaniel had never physically blocked her path. He had dismissed her, ignored her, talked past her, turned away from her, but he had never stood in her way with his weight on both feet and his jaw set like this. She stopped. She looked at him. Whatever you told him, Nathaniel said. It is not your business to discuss this estate's finances with. It is entirely my business, she said. I have been running this estate's finances for 18 months. Every creditor, every debt notice, every overdraft communication my hand. My name. The county records will confirm that. You are my wife, she said. I am. Interestingly enough. She looked at him with the same steadiness she had been holding since the night of the dinner. The same composure that she could see was unnerving him more than any amount of anger would have. I would think carefully, Nathaniel, about which legal realities you want to draw attention to right now. He stared at her. I am not your enemy, she said quietly. I have not been your enemy for 4 years. But I need you to understand something. She held his gaze. I am not what I was before you left. I am not the woman who will wait in a hall and accept whatever story you bring home and call it her life. She paused. Do you understand me? Something moved through Nathaniel's face. Not guilt, still, but something adjacent to it, the uncomfortable sensation of a man confronting a reflection that does not match the image he carries of himself. He stepped aside. She walked to the study and closed the door. The letter from Grayfield arrived on a Friday morning. She was alone in the kitchen when Bess brought it in. And she opened it at the table with both hands steady and read it through once and then set it down and sat with it. Nathaniel had already filed. Not abandoned, he had moved faster than Grayfield had predicted. He had filed a claim of estate abandonment and marital desertion in the county court 2 days ago. Citing Evelyn's extended absence from the marital home and abdication of wifely responsibilities, he had filed it in his own name alone. He had used a solicitor from Lexington, not the county. Someone who didn't know the local records and wouldn't think to check them. He had filed it the morning after she went to Harrison Caldwell's office. He had been watching her, waiting. He had known she was moving, and he had moved first. For one moment, one single moment, sitting at that kitchen table, with Grayfield's letter in her hands, Evelyn Carter felt the ground shift beneath her. Not collapse, not give way entirely, but shift. The way ground shifts when you realize the thing you thought was solid is only solid if you don't look too closely at what it's built on. She breathed. She read the letter again. And on the second reading, she found the thing she had missed. On the first, the detail Grayfield had included, almost as a footnote. The way careful men include the things they think you already know. The filing cites Mrs. Carr's departure from the estate premises on the morning of August 14th. Continued absence from the marital home, and failure to perform domestic responsibilities as grounds. August 14th, the morning she had gone to the records office. The morning she had been gone for 2 hours to retrieve a copy of her own marriage document. He had cited those 2 hours as abandonment. She put the letter down. She thought about what that meant, about a man who had been gone for 18 months. Who had traveled through Europe while she answered his creditors. Who had walked through his own front door with another woman on his arm and introduced her to the county judge as his wife, filing legal papers that described Evelyn as the one who had left. She picked up the letter again. She walked to the desk. She began to write. She sent 4 letters that morning. 1 to Grayfield, contest the filing, full documentation to follow. Cite the account management records and the marriage document and the dated correspondence with every creditor she had handled in Nathaniel's name for 18 months. 1 to Thomas Eccles, the witness from the wedding, asking him to make himself available to Grayfield for a formal statement. 1 to Judge Abernathy, not asking for intervention. Not asking for anything she didn't have the right to ask for, but reminding him in careful, measured language that he had been present on the evening in question, when Nathaniel Whitmore had introduced a second woman as his wife in front of 6 witnesses, and that she expected the court to have access to that information. And 1 to Harrison Caldwell. She told him about the filing. She told him what Nathaniel had cited. She told him about August 14th. She wrote it plainly, without decoration, the way she wrote everything that mattered. At the bottom of the letter she wrote, I believe he will move against the estate's remaining assets before the end of the month. I believe he intends to liquidate what he can and leave the debt, your debt, unserviced. I thought you should know. She sealed it. She sent Bess with it. Then she went upstairs and she changed her dress and she went to find Amelia. Amelia was in the guest room, sitting by the window, not reading the book she had open in her lap. Evelyn knocked once and came in and sat in the chair across from her. Your father, Evelyn said. Is there any possibility he would speak in your behalf? In a legal proceeding. He told me before I left that he could not promise anything after. That's not a no. Evelyn said. Amelia was quiet. Then, he doesn't undo things easily. What would make him undo this? If he believed he had been deceived, Amelia said slowly. If he understood that he had been used. She paused. He doesn't tolerate being used. Evelyn thought about the Fairfield letter she had found 8 months ago. The land arrangement that had collapsed. She thought about what Nathaniel had wanted from the Fairfields, not just capital, but connections. Railroad connections. The men Robert Fairfield knew in Richmond and Lexington and farther west. What does your father know about Nathaniel's railroad interests? She asked. Amelia frowned. Nathaniel told me he was in discussions with the railroad investors. That a land deal was coming together in the spring. What land? She stopped. Thought. He said there was a parcel in Kentucky, along the proposed new line. He said it was going to be worth 20 times its current value when the line was confirmed. Evelyn went very still. Amelia, she said carefully, do you know which parcel? He showed me a map once. He pointed to it. She closed the book in her lap. It was north of here. He said it was the most valuable land in the county. Evelyn thought about the maps on Harrison Caldwell's office wall. The rail map with the ink marks. The marks she had not been able to read from where she sat. She thought about what a man with railroad knowledge and Kentucky land would be willing to do to secure a piece of ground before the line was announced. She thought about why Harrison Caldwell had come to the dinner in the first place. Not just for the debt. He had come because he knew about the land. And Nathaniel had borrowed against the estate not to fund his travels. Not to cover the debts she had been managing, but to buy a parcel of land along a railroad route he believed was coming through. A parcel he had bought before he left. A parcel he had not told her about. She stood up. Stay in the house today, she said to Amelia. What's happening? Amelia asked. I'm not certain yet, Evelyn said. But I will be. She walked to town in under 20 minutes. Harrison Caldwell was not in his office. His clerk, a young man named Ott, who was accustomed to delivering unwelcome information with great efficiency, told her that Mr. Caldwell had gone to the land registry and was expected back within the hour. She sat in the outer office and waited. She was not a woman who waited easily. She had spent 4 years learning how, but it had never come naturally. And in the 35 minutes she sat in Harrison Caldwell's outer office, she went through every figure she knew. Every document she had access to, every legal fact she had accumulated in 18 months of managing a failing estate. Looking for the shape of what she didn't yet know. The door opened. Harrison Caldwell came in and saw her and stopped. Mrs. Carter, he said. His voice had a new quality not different in warmth, since warmth was not something he applied in large quantities, but different in its precision. The voice of a man who has just learned something and is recalibrating. Sit down, she said, then caught herself. Please. He sat. Tell me about the land parcel, she said. The one north of here. Along the proposed rail line. A silence. It was not the silence of a man who didn't know what she was talking about. How did you learn about that? He said. Amelia, she said. Nathaniel showed her a map. She described the location. She held his gaze. Is that why you came to the dinner? Not only for the debt. Another silence. The parcel was purchased 8 months ago, Harrison said finally. Through an intermediary. I did not know who had purchased it until approximately 3 weeks ago, when I traced the deed through the land registry. He looked at her directly. It was purchased in your name, Mrs. Carter. The room went very quiet. In my name, she said. I assume so, he said. Given your expression. She sat with that for a moment. A parcel of land along a railroad route purchased in her name without her knowledge or consent. A piece of ground that Nathaniel had known about before he left, that he had arranged before he left and had put in her name. Why not generosity? Nathaniel was not constructed for generosity. Liability, she thought. If the purchase was fraudulent, if he had used money that was not his to secure it, putting it in her name, placed the legal exposure on her. not on him. But there was something else. If the land was in her name, and she had abandoned the marital home, if there was a legal declaration of marital desertion, if Nathaniel could establish that the abandoned wife had assets in her name that reverted to the estate, he isn't trying to take the estate, she said slowly. He's trying to take the land. Harrison Caldwell looked at her. He put the land in my name, she said, so that when he declared me absent and had the estate's assets reassigned, the land would transfer with them. He'd recover the land through the abandonment claim. She paused. He designed this before he left for Europe. Harrison's was quiet for a long moment. That is, he said, a remarkably precise reading of what I spent the last hour in the land registry attempting to understand. He's been planning this for over a year, she said. The trip to Europe, the debt, Amelia, the land, it's all the same plan. He needed to disappear long enough to let the debts become critical, then return with a new wife and an abandonment claim to clear title and recover the land. She looked at Harrison directly. He needed me to either leave or be declared legally absent. He didn't expect me to still be here. He didn't expect you to have the accounts, Harrison said. No, she said, he didn't. Outside. The town moved. A shout. Someone's ordinary Thursday. Mrs. Carter, Harrison said, are you aware that if the land was purchased with funds misappropriated from the estate, and if your name is on the deed, you may have a right of claim to it that supersedes any estate transfer? She looked at him. Meaning, she said. Meaning, he said carefully, that the land Nathaniel Whitmore spent a year planning to recover may already legally belong to you. The thing that moved through her in that moment was not triumph. It was something colder and more complete, the sensation of a picture coming entirely into focus for the first time. Every piece finding its place, the full shape of what Nathaniel had built, and what he had built it on, and what it meant that she was still standing inside it when he came home. He underestimated me, she said. Considerably, Harrison said. She stood. She picked up the leather case. She looked at him across the desk, this man who had come to a dinner to recover a debt and had stayed because the woman managing the failing estate was more interesting than the man who had borrowed against it. I'll need Grayfield to file a counterclaim by the end of the week, she said. I'll speak to him, Harrison said. I have standing in the debt proceeding. I can support the filing, and I'll need the original land deed from the registry. I can have a copy for you by tomorrow morning. She nodded. She was almost at the door when he said, Mrs. Carter. She stopped. When this is finished, he said, and he said it with the particular care of a man choosing words he has not used in some time. What will you do with it? She thought about that. About the estate, the land, the accounts she had kept for 18 months, the workers and tenants she had managed, the mill she had repaired, the fields she had argued creditors into patience over. I'll run it, she said, properly, without anyone telling me it isn't mine to run. He looked at her for a long moment. I believe you will, he said. She walked out into the street. The morning was cold and clear and ordinary, and she walked home with the leather case under her arm, and land deed she hadn't known she owned somewhere in the county registry, with her name on it. And she thought about a man who had spent a year building a trap and had built it, without knowing, around a woman who had spent 18 months learning exactly how traps worked. She thought about Nathaniel in the front hall, with his weight on both feet, trying to block her path. She thought about the look on his face when she had said, I am not what I was before you left. He had not understood her then. He was beginning to, she thought. He was only beginning. She walked faster. There was work to do. The counterclaim hit the county court on a Wednesday. Grayfield filed it himself, in person, before 9 in the morning. And by noon the news had moved through Harlan County, the way news always moved in a place that small, not through any single mouth, but through all of them simultaneously. The way a fire moves when the wind is right and everything is dry. Evelyn knew it had landed when Nathaniel came to find her. She was in the study, going through the land deed copy. Harrison had sent over that morning. When she heard his footsteps in the hall, not the careful, measured tread of a man biding his time, but the fast, hard footsteps of a man who has just received information that has changed his understanding of his situation. She set the deed on the desk face down and folded her hands on top of it and waited. He came through the door without knocking. "You filed against me," he said. "I filed a counterclaim to a legal proceeding you initiated against me," she said. "Those are different things. You went to a court, my county court." "My Judge Abernathy is the county judge," she said. "Not yours." He stepped forward. "Evelyn, what do you think you are doing?" She looked at him directly. "I am protecting what is legally mine. The same thing I have been doing for 18 months while you were in Europe." Something cracked in his composure. Not broke. Nathaniel was too practiced for a clean break, but cracked. The way ice cracks before it goes. "You don't understand what you've started. You don't understand the people involved, the railroad investors," she said. He stopped. The silence was total. She watched him absorb it, the fact that she knew. The speed at which she had gotten there, the recalculation she could see moving behind his eyes as he tried to locate where the leak was and what else she might have reached. "Who told you?" he said. A demand. "You showed Amelia a map," Evelyn said. She described the location. "I did the rest myself." She tilted her head. "You ought to have been more careful about what you showed her. Though I suppose you didn't expect her to speak to me." Nathaniel's jaw was tight. The land is in my name," she said. "Has been for 8 months. I imagine you thought that was very clever. Put it in the absent wife's name, declare her abandoned. Recover the land through the estate transfer." She paused. "What you didn't account for is that a woman whose name is on a deed has a legal claim to that deed that does not simply transfer because her husband files a piece of paper calling her absent. You haven't been managing that land. I didn't know it existed," she said evenly. "Because you put it in my name without my knowledge or consent. Which is its own legal problem, Nathaniel. Grayfield is quite interested in it." He stared at her. For the first time since he had walked back through the front door, she saw something in his face that was not calculation and was not performance. It was the raw, unguarded look of a man who has walked into a room expecting to be the most prepared person in it, and found that someone has been there before him. "What do you want?" he said. She had been waiting for that question for 4 years. She didn't let herself feel it. There was time for that later. In the dark, when the work was done, and the house was quiet. Right now there was only the desk between them and the folded deed beneath her hands, and the specific, focused clarity of a woman who knows exactly where she stands. "I want what is mine," she said. "The estate property rights as specified in the original marriage agreement. Legal recognition of my 18 months of estate management. The land deed formalized in my name with clear title." She held his gaze. "And I want the railroad investors to know that the asset representation they received was falsified." Nathaniel went pale. Not the pale of embarrassment. The pale of a man who has just seen the full consequence of something and understands it completely for the first time. "You can't," he said. "They will withdraw," she said. "Yes. And the fraudulent debt claim against the estate, the one built on the falsified yield reports, will be formally documented in a proceeding that Harrison Caldwell has standing in." She let that settle. "You borrowed money against assets that didn't exist." "Nathaniel, that is not a civil matter. That is a criminal one." The word criminal sat in the air between them like something physical. "Unless," she said. He looked at her. "Unless you sign the estate management rights over to me formally and withdraw the abandonment claim and provide Grayfield with a full accounting of the railroad land transaction." She paused. "In which case Harrison Caldwell recovers his debt through the land proceeds. The railroad investors receive an honest accounting and may choose to renegotiate on accurate terms. And the criminal exposure remains a private matter between you and your conscience." Nathaniel was very still. "You'd let me walk away," he said slowly. I'd let you leave, she said. Those are different things. He looked at her for a long moment. She watched him search her face for softness, for the opening he had always found before the place where her patience became accommodation, where her composure became capitulation. He searched and he did not find it, and she watched him understand, finally and completely, that it was not there anymore. I need time, he said. You have until Friday, she said. She picked up the deed and put it in the leather case and stood, and Nathaniel for the second time stepped aside to let her pass. He didn't give her until Friday. He gave her until Thursday evening, which she supposed was its own kind of answer about the state of his remaining options. Grayfield came to the house with the papers at 5:30. Nathaniel signed them at the sitting room table, with Grayfield and Evelyn and Bess as witness. And he signed them without ceremony, without speech, without any of the performance she might have expected from a man who had built his entire identity on the appearance of control. He simply signed, put the pen down, stood up. He looked at Evelyn. I did love you, he said once. I want you to know that. She looked back at him. She thought about what love meant to a man who had told his second wife that his first wife was dead. She thought about what love meant when it was expressed as management and absence, and 18 months of silence broken by a letter asking her to arrange something respectable. I know you believe that, she said. It was the most honest thing she could offer him, and he seemed to understand it, because he nodded once and picked up his traveling coat from the chair where he had left it and walked out of the room. She heard the front door close. She stood in the sitting room with Grayfield's papers in her hands and Bess hovering in the doorway and the fire burning low in the grate. And she breathed. Ma'am, Bess said. I'm all right, Evelyn said. She wasn't entirely sure that was true, but she was something. She was upright. She was clear. She was standing in her own house with her name on its documents, and the deed to a piece of railroad land in the leather case on the table. And Nathaniel Whitmore was on the other side of a door he had chosen to walk through. That was enough. For tonight, that was enough. It was Amelia who came to her an hour later. She found Evelyn at the writing desk, drafting the letter to the railroad adjutant that she had promised herself she would write honestly and completely regardless of how it complicated the next 6 months. Because she had decided, sitting across from Harrison Caldwell in his plain office with its maps and its lack of ornamentation, that she was going to do things properly or not at all. And doing things properly meant not building the next chapter on the same crooked foundation Nathaniel had used for this one. Amelia sat in the chair by the window and waited until Evelyn put the pen down. He's gone? Amelia asked. Yes. A pause. I heard the door. Yes. Amelia turned the family ring on her right hand, the gesture Evelyn had come to recognize as the thing she did when she was working up to something. My father wrote again, Amelia said. Evelyn looked up. This morning, before Grayfield came, Amelia reached into the pocket of her dress and produced a folded letter. She held it but didn't open it. He said he had received communication from a solicitor in Lexington. He said the communication contained evidence that the settlement terms Nathaniel had represented to him were fabricated. She paused. He said he was coming to Kentucky. Evelyn was quiet. He said, Amelia continued, her voice careful now, that he had been made a fool of, that his name had been used to facilitate a fraudulent land transaction, that he intended to make his position clear in person. She looked at Evelyn. He's not a gentleman when he feels his name has been damaged. No, Evelyn said. I don't imagine he is. He'll be here by the end of the week. Evelyn thought about Robert Fairfield. Tobacco merchant, railroad connections, a proud man who did not tolerate being used. She thought about what a man like that, arriving in Harlan County at the end of this particular week, could do for or against, depending on which way he landed. When he arrives, Evelyn said, I'd like to speak with him. Amelia looked at her steadily. Why? Because he has railroad connections, Evelyn said. And because the land north of here, the land that is legally in my name, is worth considerably more to someone who can bring the railroad through it than it is sitting in a county deed registry. She looked at Amelia directly. And because your father has been wronged the same way you have been. And I find that men who have been wronged together are sometimes willing to do things together they wouldn't do separately. Amelia was quiet for a long moment. You're not afraid of him, she said. I'm not afraid of much anymore, Evelyn said. I found it's mostly not efficient. Something moved across Amelia's face, not quite a smile, but the closest thing to one that Evelyn had seen from her since she arrived. He's going to like you, she said. He won't want to. But he's going to. Robert Fairfield arrived on a Saturday. He was not what Evelyn had pictured. She had built him in her mind as a version of Nathaniel Large Presence. Easy authority, the confident bearing of a man accustomed to having rooms arrange themselves around him. What came through the door was a compact, weathered man in his late 50s, with the hands of someone who had started in the business himself before the money came, and the eyes of someone who had not forgotten it. He looked at everything twice. He shook hands like he was taking a measurement. He looked at Evelyn the way he looked at everything else twice, carefully taking the measure. Mrs. Carter, he said. Mr. Fairfield, she said. Thank you for coming. I didn't come for courtesy, he said. I came because a man used my daughter and my name to back a transaction he had no right to back, and I intend to understand the full scope of it. Then we want the same thing, she said. Come in. She took him to the study, not the sitting room. The study, the room with the estate ledgers, and the account records and the land deed laid out in the order she had arranged them the night before. She had thought carefully about the order. There was a shape to information. When you were presenting it to a man who dealt in figures and did not tolerate being managed a shape that let him feel he was arriving at conclusions himself rather than being led to them. She walked him through it. She started with the estate accounts, the real ones. Her 18 months of records, the figures that showed the actual financial position versus what Nathaniel had represented to external parties. She let him read. She didn't explain while he was reading. She waited. He read for 12 minutes without speaking. When he looked up, he said, "These are your records." "Your hand, every entry," she said. Dated, sourced. Cross-referenced with the bank correspondence. You can verify against the bank's own ledgers. I have the account numbers and the contact name in Richmond. He looked back at the records. The yield figures he gave my people in Richmond were fabricated before he left for Europe, she said. He knew the estate couldn't service the debt he was creating. He needed external capital to purchase the land before the rail line announcement. And he needed a credible financial picture to get it. Fairfield set the ledger down. And the land. She set the deed in front of him. He looked at it. He looked at her name on it. He looked up at her. He put it in your name, he said. To sell from the liability, she said. And to create a mechanism for recovering it through the abandonment claim. If I was legally declared absent, the land would transfer with the estate assets. But you weren't absent. No, she said. I was here, managing his accounts and answering his creditors and keeping this estate alive. She held his gaze. I was the last thing he should have used as a legal instrument. Because I know where everything is. Fairfield looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, my daughter. Did she know any of it? No, Evelyn said. She was told you had agreed to the settlement. She was told the estate was clear and the marriage was legitimate, and there was no one here. She paused. She believed him. She had no reason not to. Something moved through Fairfield's face. The particular grief of a father who has been kept from protecting his child by the same deception that hurt her. She's upstairs, Evelyn said quietly. She's been here since the dinner. She hasn't had anywhere else to go. Fairfield stood very still. I wrote her a letter, he said, before she left. I told her I could not promise. I know what the letter said, Evelyn said. She told me. She's my daughter, Fairfield said. And it came out rough, like a man saying a thing he has been holding at arm's length and has finally decided to stop holding. Whatever I wrote in whatever letter, she's my daughter. Yes, Evelyn said. She is. He stood. I'd like to see her, of course. She rose. But first, 5 minutes more. There's one more thing you need to understand about the land. He sat back down. Slowly, she told him about the railroad route, about what the parcel north of the estate was worth if the line came through on the proposed trajectory. About what it was worth to someone with the connections to confirm the route and facilitate the development on accurate legal terms. She told him what she needed from him and what she was willing to offer in return, not as charity, not as compensation for what Nathaniel had done, but as a business arrangement between two people who had both been wronged by the same man and who both had something the other one needed. Fairfield listened without interrupting, which she was coming to understand was his version of full attention. When she finished, he said, "You're proposing a joint venture. I'm proposing an honest one," she said. "Which is, I understand, a novelty in connection with this property." He looked at her. Then, for the first time since he had walked through the door, something shifted in his face that was not grief and not calculation. He almost laughed. But almost. "All right, Mrs. Carter," he said. 5 minutes. Then I want to see my daughter. The meeting at the county courthouse happened on a Tuesday. Grayfield had arranged it. Harrison Caldwell was there with his own solicitor. Robert Fairfield was there with 2 men from his Richmond office. Judge Abernathy presided, not in his formal judicial capacity, but in his capacity as the county's senior legal officer. The distinction mattered, and Grayfield had been precise about it. Because precise distinctions were the only kind that held up. Evelyn sat at the table with Grayfield on her left and the leather case in front of her, and every document she had assembled over the past 3 weeks arranged in the order they would be needed. Nathaniel was not there. He had left Harlan County 4 days after signing the papers. She did not know where he had gone, and she had not asked. The proceedings did not require him. The documents were sufficient. A man's absence from the consequences of his own actions was, in a legal sense, its own kind of statement. The proceeding took 2 hours. Grayfield presented the marriage record and the estate management documentation. Harrison's solicitor presented the debt claim and the falsified yield reports. Fairfield's men presented the evidence of fraudulent settlement representation. Judge Abernathy listened to all of it with the particular, careful stillness of a man who had been at a dinner 12 days ago and had watched a woman sit down at a table after being erased from her own life, and who had been waiting, since that evening, to do something useful about it. At the end of the 2 hours, Judge Abernathy looked across the table at Evelyn. "Mrs. Carter," he said, "the abandonment claim filed by Nathaniel Whitmore is dismissed. The estate management rights revert to your name under the terms of the original marriage agreement. The land deed north of the county line is confirmed in your name with clear title." He paused. "Is there anything else you need this court to establish?" Evelyn thought about that. She thought about 4 years. She thought about the dark green dress with its twice-repaired sleeve. She thought about 18 months of creditor letters and estate accounts, and the quiet, particular loneliness of managing a life that someone else kept saying they would come back and participate in. "No," she said, "I think that covers it." Judge Abernathy nodded. He signed the papers, and it was done. Harrison Caldwell caught up with her on the courthouse steps. She had come out into the air because she needed a moment, one moment, between the room where things had been decided and the world where she now had to figure out what to do with the decision, and she was standing on the top step with her leather case, the cold morning on her face when she heard his boots on the stone behind her. She didn't turn around. "Well," she said. "Well," he said. He came to stand beside her, not close, the appropriate distance of a man who has learned, or is learning, to let a person have the amount of space they need. They stood there for a moment. "Fairfield wants to move quickly on the railroad development," Harrison said. "I know. I told him spring. He thinks that's too slow. He can think whatever he likes, she said. The land is mine, and I'll develop it on terms that don't require me to move faster than I can do properly. She paused. I've done enough things fast and inadequate. I intend to do this one right. Harrison was quiet. Below them, the town went about its Tuesday morning without particular awareness that the woman on the courthouse steps had just spent 2 hours legally reconstructing everything that had been taken from her and was now standing in the cold air, trying to figure out what it felt like to have it back. Can I ask you something? Harrison said. You can ask, she said. When Bess told you about the letter Nathaniel was drafting the abandonment language, what did you feel? She thought about that morning. The kitchen table. Grayfield's letter. The word abandoned sitting in the air like something with weight. Afraid, she said. And after 30 seconds, angry, she said. And then clear. She glanced at him. Fear and anger are both useful if you don't stay in them. I've learned to pass through them quickly. He looked at her. The particular way he looked at her that she had noticed from across a dinner table 12 days ago and had been noticing with increasing frequency since the way that was not assessment, not calculation, not the practical measuring attention he gave to figures and documents, but something more direct and less guarded. You are, he said. Very carefully, the most formidable person I have encountered in 15 years of doing business in 3 states. She turned and looked at him fully. I'm a woman who kept good records, she said. You're a woman who kept good records, he agreed. And knew exactly when to use them, and on whom, and in what order. And to what end. He held her gaze. Don't minimize it. She didn't have an answer for that. She was not accustomed to being told not to minimize herself by a man who did not appear to be performing the instruction. She looked back at the town. The estate will need a full audit, she said. Properly done this time by an independent firm. I know one in Lexington, he said. I'll send word. And the mill needs a new wheel mechanism. The repair I arranged last spring was a stopgap. I can recommend an engineer, and the Eastern Field tenant agreements need to be renegotiated. They've been managing on terms that weren't fair to them for 2 seasons. That, he said. You'll have to handle yourself. I don't know the tenants. No, she said. I do. A pause. Mrs. Carter, he said. She waited. When the audit is done, he said, and the field agreements are settled, and the railroad development is underway, what then? She thought about Amelia upstairs in the guest room with her father. The 2 of them talking in voices too low for anyone else to hear, making their way back towards something. She thought about Bess in the kitchen. 17 years old and careful and good. She thought about the Eastern Field tenants who had managed 2 bad seasons on unfair terms and had never once complained to her face. Only worked harder. She thought about what it meant to have something that was yours. Not given. Not permitted. Then she said, I run it. Harrison Caldwell looked at her for a long moment. And then, quietly, without performance, in the way of a man who does not do things for effect, he said, I'd like to help with that if you'd allow it. She looked at him. She looked at him the way she had learned to look at things that mattered twice. Carefully, without flinching. I'll consider it, she said. She picked up the leather case. She walked down the courthouse steps. And behind her, Harrison Caldwell stood on the stone and watched her go. And did not call after her, and did not follow, because he was beginning to understand that the woman walking away from him was not walking away from him at all. She was simply moving at her own pace, in her own direction, toward a life she was building with her own hands. And he was, for the first time in a very long time, entirely content to wait. The audit firm from Lexington sent 2 men. They arrived on a Monday morning with leather satchels and the careful, unhurried manner of professionals who have seen worse than this and are not easily surprised. Evelyn met them at the door herself, showed them to the study, set the full 18 months of ledgers on the desk in chronological order, and told them that if they needed anything clarified, they should come to her directly and not to anyone else in the house. The older of the two men, a Mr. Haverford, gray at the temples, ink stain on his right forefinger, that suggested he had been doing this work for a very long time, looked at the ledgers and then at her and said, "These are your records, Mrs. Carter. Every entry," she said. Dated and sourced. He opened the first ledger. "Read 3 pages. Looked up. You have a background in accounting? I have a background in not being able to afford mistakes," she said. He looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded, once in the way of a man who has just recalibrated something, and went back to reading. She left them to it. She had other things to do. The Eastern Field tenants were first. She had been putting this off not from reluctance but from the need to have the legal standing clear before she made promises she intended to keep. And the legal standing was now clear, documented, signed by Judge Abernathy, and filed in the county registry with her name on it in 3 separate places. So she walked out to the Eastern Field on a Tuesday morning with the renegotiated agreement terms she had drafted herself, and she knocked on doors, and she sat at kitchen tables she had never been invited to sit at before, because Nathaniel had not believed in that kind of management. And she talked to the men and women who had been working this land on terms that hadn't been fair since the season before last. The first family was the Coopers, Elias Cooper, 43, who had been farming the eastern quarter for 9 years, and his wife Ruth, who had kept their household running through 2 bad seasons with a precision that Evelyn recognized and respected. Evelyn sat at their table and laid out the new terms: reduced rent for the next 2 seasons, profit sharing on the yield above a fair baseline, a written agreement rather than the verbal arrangement Nathaniel had preferred, because verbal arrangements were easier to revise in your own favor later. Elias Cooper read the paper 3 times. Then he looked at his wife. Then he looked at Evelyn. "This is real," he said. "It's real," she said. "I'll have Grayfield formalize it this week if you're willing." Ruth Cooper reached across the table and covered Evelyn's hand with her own, and didn't say anything, and Evelyn held very still and let the gesture be what it was. "We're willing," Elias said. She went to 4 more families that week. Every conversation was different in its particulars and identical in its shape, the careful reading. The disbelief, the moment when the disbelief became something else. By Friday, she had signed preliminary agreements with all 5 tenant families and had a list of repairs that needed doing on 4 of the 5 properties that she had not known about because Nathaniel had not considered it his concern to know. She added the repairs to the list she was keeping. The list was getting long. She found she didn't mind. Haverford came to find her at the end of the first week. She was in the kitchen, going over supply accounts with Bess, when he appeared in the doorway with his ledger under his arm, and the expression of a man carrying information he is not sure how to deliver. "Mrs. Carter," he said, "we've found something." She set down the supply account. "Tell me." He came in and sat at the table she gestured for him to sit, and he did, which told her he thought this was going to take a minute, and he opened the ledger to a page he had marked and set it in front of her. The estate operating accounts for the 18 months prior to Mr. Whitmore's departure for Europe, he said. "Before you began your management." She looked at the page. "There are withdrawals here," he said, pointing to a column of figures that don't correspond to any estate expense I can locate. They're not large individually, but over the 18 months prior to his departure. The total amounts to," he pointed to a figure at the bottom. She looked at it. "That is considerably more than I thought the operating reserve held," she said. It was considerably more than it held, Haverford said, before these withdrawals. "These amounts left the estate accounts, and I cannot find where they went. There's no corresponding purchase, no debt payment, no recorded expense of any kind." She thought about the railroad land, about the purchase price of a parcel north of the county line 8 months ago. She thought about an intermediary, someone Nathaniel would have used to keep his name off the transaction. "Can you trace where the withdrawals went?" she said. "That's outside our formal scope," Haverford said carefully. But he reached into his satchel and produced a second paper. "The bank in Richmond, as a courtesy, provided me with the corresponding account records for the period. There is a secondary account, not under Mr. Whitmore's name." She looked at the paper. The secondary account was registered to a firm called Whitmore and Associates, which, as far as Evelyn could determine, having never heard of it before this moment, consisted entirely of Nathaniel Whitmore. "He hid the money in a shell account," she said. "It would appear so," Haverford said, "and used it to purchase the railroad land through an intermediary. That would be consistent with what the figures suggest." She thought about the counterclaim, about what Grayfield had filed and what had been established in the courthouse proceeding. She thought about what this information, a hidden account, systematic withdrawals, a shell company, did to the legal picture that had already been settled. Then she thought about something else. The investors, she said. The railroad investors Nathaniel approached in Richmond. Did they know about the shell account? Haverford was quiet for a moment. "I couldn't say. But if they did," she said slowly, "if one of them knew about the account and helped structure it, then the fraudulent representation was not Nathaniel's alone," Haverford said. "And the liability would extend accordingly." She sat with that. She thought about the letter she had sent to the railroad investors 2 weeks ago. The honest accounting she had promised herself she would provide. She thought about who had written back and who had not, and what the silence of certain parties might mean in light of what Haverford had just put on the table in front of her. "Give me the full list of withdrawals," she said. "Every date, every amount, every corresponding account notation." She looked at him. "And send the bank records to Grayfield today." Haverford nodded. He gathered his papers. He paused at the door. "Mrs. Carter," he said, "in 20 years of estate audits, I've encountered 4 instances of this kind of systematic concealment." He paused. "In 3 of those 4 cases, the person who commissioned the audit was not the victim. They were protecting themselves." He looked at her directly. "I want you to know that I understand which case this is." She held his gaze. "Thank you, Mr. Haverford." He left. She sat at the kitchen table for a long moment after he went. Then she said, "Bess, I need to go to town." Harrison Caldwell was in when she arrived. She did not wait for aught to announce her. She walked through the outer office and knocked once on the inner door and pushed it open. And Harrison looked up from his desk with the particular expression of a man who has learned not to show surprise, but has not entirely succeeded. "You need to see something," she said. She set Haverford's page on the desk. He looked at it. He read it. He turned it over to check the back, which she had already checked nothing on the back, and set it down. "Whitmore and Associates," he said. "Have you heard of it?" "No." "Is it possible one of the Richmond investors has?" Harrison was very still. "Why?" "Because someone structured that account," she said. Nathaniel was not subtle, and he was not technically sophisticated. "The shell account is clean." Haverford said the documentation was professional. "That kind of professional requires either a very good solicitor or a partner who knew what they were doing." Harrison looked at the page again. "There was a man at the Richmond investment meeting," he said slowly. "A partner of Nathaniel's introduced as a business associate. I didn't recognize the name, but I noted it because he asked very specific questions about the rail route timeline. Questions that suggested he already knew the route." "What was the name?" she said. Harrison opened his desk drawer. He looked through a stack of correspondence not long. He knew where things were. He was a man who knew where things were, and produced a single page. He read it. "Carver," he said. "Edmund Carver. He represented himself as a Richmond land broker." She didn't know the name, but she knew someone who might. She wrote to Robert Fairfield that evening. She kept it short. She gave him the name, the description Harrison had provided, the account structure Haverford had documented. She asked if Edmund Carver was known to him or his Richmond contacts. She sealed the letter and sent it by the first morning post. Fairfield wrote back in 4 days, which was fast for a man who ran 3 businesses and had only recently reconciled with his daughter. The letter was 7 lines. Edmund Carver was not a Richmond land broker. Edmund Carver was a junior partner at the investment firm that had provided capital for the railroad land purchase. He had structured 4 similar transactions in the past 2 years, all involving shell accounts and all involving properties along the proposed Western Rail extension. 2 of those properties were now in dispute. One had already been the subject of a fraud complaint filed in Richmond court. He was, Fairfield wrote in his precise, compact hand, a man the Richmond business community had been watching for approximately 18 months and had been unable to pin down because each transaction was just barely on the correct side of a very fine legal line. Until now, Fairfield added, if Mrs. Carter had documentation. She had documentation. She wrote back immediately. The next 3 weeks moved fast. That was the only way she could describe it afterward, not chaotic. Not overwhelming, but fast, the way a river moves when it has found its grade and all the blockages have been cleared and it simply goes. She moved with it. She had gotten good at moving with things. Grayfield filed the supplementary complaint against Carver in Richmond, with Fairfield's introduction and Haverford's audit documentation. Harrison provided a formal statement regarding the investment meeting. 2 of the other affected property owners' people she had never met, connected through Fairfield's network, provided corroborating evidence that Grayfield called, in his measured professional way, compelling. Edmund Carver's firm withdrew from the railroad investment within a week of the filing. Formally, quietly, in the way that entities withdraw when they know what is coming and prefer to make themselves smaller targets. The railroad investors who remained the legitimate ones, the ones who had been as deceived as everyone else, came back to the table. Evelyn met with their representative in Harrison's office, with Harrison present and Grayfield at her elbow, and she laid out the accurate land assessment and the honest development terms and the profit structure she and Fairfield had agreed on. The representative, a careful man named Bledsoe, who wore his authority, quietly read everything she put in front of him without a word. When he finished, he looked up and said, "You prepared all of this yourself?" "With my solicitor," she said. "And Mr. Fairfield's input on the railroad terms?" Bledsoe looked at Grayfield, then at Harrison, then back at Evelyn. "The previous owner of this land was Mr. Whitmore, my husband," she said. "The land was purchased in my name without my knowledge. The legal title has been confirmed in my name by the county court." She held his gaze. "I am the owner, Mr. Bledsoe. I am also the person you will be doing business with going forward. If we can agree on terms." Bledsoe was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I find I prefer dealing with someone who knows what they have." "So do I," she said. They agreed on terms before the end of the hour. It was Harrison who noticed she hadn't eaten. They were in his office after Bledsoe left, the 2 of them with the signed preliminary agreement on the desk, between them and the particular stillness that falls after something large has been accomplished. And Harrison looked at her and said, "When did you last eat a proper meal?" She thought about it. "Breakfast. That was 9 hours ago." "I'm aware. Come and have dinner," he said. It was not phrased as a question, and it was not phrased as an order. It was phrased the way Harrison Caldwell phrased most things, as a statement of what he thought was sensible. Offered without pressure but without apology. She looked at him. She thought about all the reasons that was complicated the town. The talk, the specific vulnerability of a woman in her position, being seen at dinner with a man in his. She thought about how much she did not care about any of those reasons. "All right," she said. They went to the inn at the edge of town, which was the only place in Harlan County that served a proper meal after 6 o'clock. And they sat at a corner table, and Evelyn ate roast chicken and bread and drank 1 glass of cider and felt, for the first time in longer than she could accurately measure, Something approaching ordinary. Not happiness exactly. Something quieter than happiness. The absence of dread. Harrison talked about the railroad development, not the financial details. They had covered those, but the practical shape of it. What it would mean for the county. How many people it would employ during the construction phase. What it would do to the land values on the northern edge. She listened and asked questions and argued with him about the wage structure for the construction workers, which she thought was too low and which he had not. She suspected, previously considered an argument worth having. "You're going to push Fairfield on the wages too," he said. "I'm going to push everyone on the wages," she said. "The men who build the thing should be able to afford to live near it." He looked at her. Not the calculating look and not the respectful, professional look. Something else. Something that was warmer and less guarded and that she had been noticing. With a frequency she was no longer entirely pretending not to notice. "For the past 3 weeks. Can I tell you something?" he said. "You can tell me," she said. "The night of the dinner," he said. "When Nathaniel introduced Amelia and the room went quiet, I was watching you." "I know," she said. "I saw. I was expecting you to break," he said. "Not because I thought you were weak. Because any person would have. And you didn't. You sat down and you called for dinner to be served." He paused. "I've watched a great many people face a great many difficult moments in my life, Mrs. Carter. I have never seen anyone handle one with that particular quality of." He seemed to search for the word. "Grace," he said finally. "That is the word. I don't use it often. I mean it precisely." She was quiet for a moment. "I was terrified," she said. "You couldn't have known." "No," he said. "But I know now, and it doesn't change what I said. It makes it more true." He held her gaze. "It is easier to be graceful when you are not afraid." She looked at the table, at her hands around the cider glass, at the ordinary fact of sitting across from a man who saw her clearly and was not frightened by what he saw and was not, as far as she could determine, performing the seeing. "Harrison," she said. It was the first time she had used his given name and she felt him register it. The small shift of attention it produced. "Yes," he said. "I don't know what I'm doing," she said. "With this." She looked up. "With whatever this is. I know exactly what I'm doing, with the estate and the land and the railroad development and the tenant agreements and the audit and the legal proceedings. I know all of that. I have no idea what I'm doing with this." He looked at her steadily. "Neither do I," he said. "I have considerably more experience with land agreements than with." He paused. "With this. Whatever this is," she almost smiled. "Not quite, but almost. That's surprisingly reassuring," she said. "Good," he said. "I'll take it." Amelia left on a Thursday in November. She came downstairs with her bags, not the cream traveling coat. A simpler one, practical for the road, and found Evelyn in the front hall, and stood there for a moment with the particular expression of someone who has several things to say and is trying to decide which ones matter enough to say. "My father has arranged a house in Richmond," she said. "Near his offices, I heard," Evelyn said. "He wrote to me." "He likes you enormously," Amelia said. "He won't say so directly because he's not built that way. But he wrote to me last week and said you were the most commercially sound person he had dealt with in 10 years. And from him, that is, it's the highest thing he knows how to say." "I'll take it," Evelyn said. Amelia was quiet for a moment. Then, "I'm sorry. For coming here." "For being don't," Evelyn said. "You were not the thing that was done to me. You were done to the same as I was." Amelia looked at her. "You're a remarkable woman, Mrs. Carter." "Evelyn," she said. "Please." Something moved across Amelia's face, the closest thing to peace that Evelyn had seen there. "Evelyn," she said. They stood for a moment. Then Amelia stepped forward and hugged her quickly. Fiercely, the hug of a young woman who has learned something important and is not yet sure how to carry it, but is determined to try, and then she stepped back and picked up her bag and walked out to the carriage her father had sent. Evelyn stood in the doorway and watched it go. The house was quiet behind her. Not the quiet of emptiness. Bess was in the kitchen. The auditors were finishing their final report. There were tenant agreements to sign and railroad correspondence to answer and a mill wheel that needed ordering before the ground froze. The quiet of a house that belonged to the person standing in it. She had not felt that before. She felt it now. Harrison came by that evening uninvited, which was unlike him. She was at the writing desk in the study when she heard his knock 3 times. Deliberate, the knock of a man who has decided to do something and is not second-guessing the decision, and she said, "Come in." And he came in, and he was not carrying anything, and he did not have papers, and he did not have news about the railroad or the audit or Edmund Carver's ongoing legal difficulties. He just stood there. She put her pen down. "What is it?" He looked at her for a moment. "I had a conversation with Robert Fairfield yesterday." "I know." "About the spring construction timeline." "Yes." "And about other things." He came further into the room and stood at the near side of the desk. "He told me you have been offered a position." She went still. "He told me," Harrison continued, "that a firm in Richmond, a land development firm, 3 partners, established, has offered you a consultancy." He said you hadn't told me. "I was still deciding," she said. "Were you?" "I am still deciding," she said. "It's a serious offer." "It would mean time in Richmond." "It would mean leaving," he said. "I didn't say that. It would mean time away," he said. "Which for an estate in early development with tenant agreements and a railroad construction beginning in spring." "I know what it would mean," she said. "I don't need you to list the complications." "I know the complications." He was quiet. She looked at him, at the fact of him standing on the other side of her desk in her study in her house at 7 in the evening, without an appointment or a reason other than the reason he was not saying. "Harrison," she said, "say what you came to say." He looked at her steadily. "Don't go to Richmond," he said. She waited. "Not because of the estate," he said. "Not because of the railroad or the tenants or the development. Because," he stopped, tried again, "because I have spent 15 years building things in 3 states and I have done it alone and I was not aware, until approximately 4 weeks ago, that I had any particular objection to that." He held her gaze. "I have an objection to it now." The study was very quiet. Evelyn looked at him. She looked at him the way she looked at things that mattered, carefully, without flinching, taking the full measure. "You are a difficult man," she said. "I know," he said. "You are accustomed to having things on your own terms." "I am working on that," he said. "Actively. With more effort than I typically apply to anything that does not involve a legal agreement." She almost smiled. She looked at the desk, at the letter from the Richmond firm sitting in the corner of the blotter where she had put it 2 days ago and had been looking at sidelong ever since. The way you look at something you haven't decided about yet. She thought about Richmond, about what it would be, about what she would do there and who she would be doing it. Then she thought about this desk in this study, in this house that was hers, and the eastern field with the Coopers and their 4 other families, and Bess in the kitchen, and the rail map on Harrison Caldwell's office wall, with the ink marks she could now read because he had shown her what they meant, and what was coming in the spring, and what she intended to build with it. She picked up the letter from the Richmond firm. She read the last 2 lines of it one more time. She set it down. She looked at Harrison Caldwell. "I'll write to them tomorrow," she said, "and tell them I'm unavailable." Something moved through his face. Not relief, or not only relief. Something more than relief. The expression of a man who has held himself at a careful distance from wanting something and has just been given permission to stop. "Thank you," he said. "Don't thank me," she said. "I'm not staying for you. I'm staying because this is mine, and I built it, and I intend to see what it becomes." She held his gaze. "You are simply," she paused, choosing the word. "You are simply also here." He looked at her. And this time clearly, without reservation, the way a man smiles when he has stopped pretending he is a reason not to. Harrison Caldwell smiled. "I'll take it," he said. She picked up her pen. she went back to work. And Harrison Caldwell sat down in the chair across from the desk, not leaving. Not pressing, simply present, and the house settled around them both. Quiet and solid and entirely hers, and she wrote, and the evening went on. And outside the first frost of November was beginning to silver the ground of an estate that had been saved, not by luck or inheritance or the intervention of any person, but by the particular, patient, unbreakable will of the woman sitting at the desk. The woman who had stayed, the woman who had kept the books. The woman who had known, when no one else was paying attention, exactly what everything was worth. The frost came in hard that first week of December. Evelyn felt it in the morning before she opened her eyes, the specific quality of cold that settles into a house when the season has committed itself. When there is no more question of whether winter is coming, because winter has arrived and has made itself at home. She lay still for a moment in the dark, listening to the house around her, the way she had gotten into the habit of doing since the night Nathaniel left. Not from anxiety, from something more like ownership. The quiet pleasure of a woman taking inventory of what is hers. Then she got up. There was work to do. There was always work to do. And she had stopped apologizing for the fact that she was glad of it. The construction survey crew arrived from Lexington on a Wednesday. 4 men with equipment and notebooks, and the particular focused energy of people who have been given a clear task and intend to execute it. Evelyn met them at the northern boundary of the railroad land herself. With the survey maps Harrison had provided and the development agreement she and Bledsoe had signed folded in her coat pocket. She walked the boundary with them in the cold, answering questions, asking better ones, and when the lead surveyor, a man named Pitt who had worked rail lines in 4 states, said that the grade on the eastern slope was going to require a retaining structure she had not budgeted for. She asked him 3 specific questions about the cost range, thanked him, and revised the figure in her ledger on the walk home. She told Harrison that evening. How much over, he asked. She told him. He was quiet for a moment. I can absorb part of it through the debt recovery settlement if Grayfield structures it correctly. I already asked Grayfield, she said. He thinks it's possible. He's drafting the language. Harrison looked at her. When did you talk to Grayfield? This morning.
Before the surveyors arrived. Another moment of quiet.
The particular quiet of a man recalibrating again. The speed at which the woman across from him moves. Is there anything you need from me in this situation? He said carefully. That you haven't already handled? Yes, she said. I need you to come to the boundary survey on Friday. Pitt has questions about the Caldwell land on the northern edge, and I don't have authority to answer them. I'll be there, he said. 7 in the morning. I'll be there at 7, he said. She nodded and went back to the ledger. The letter came on a Thursday. It was postmarked Richmond, and it was not from Fairfield, and it was not from Bledsoe, and it was not from any of the parties she had been corresponding with in the months since the courthouse proceeding. She looked at the handwriting on the envelope for a moment before she opened it, deliberate. Slightly cramped, the hand of a man who learned to write in a hurry and never entirely lost the habit. She opened it. It was from Nathaniel. 4 paragraphs. She read them standing at the hall table, coat still on. The cold of the morning still on her face. He was in Richmond. He had found work with a trading firm, junior position. He wrote, without the particular shame she might have expected, which told her he had moved past shame into something more pragmatic. He had heard about the railroad development. He had heard about the Carver proceedings. He wrote that he understood now the full scope of what he had set in motion, and that he did not expect forgiveness and was not asking for it. The 4th paragraph was 3 sentences. I told you once that I loved you. I believed that was true, in whatever way I was capable of it then. I am not certain it was enough, but I am certain it was real. She stood with the letter for a long moment. Then she folded it twice and put it in the drawer of the hall table, the same drawer where she had put his first letter. the one asking her to arrange something respectable, and she took off her coat and hung it on the hook and walked to the study. She did not answer the letter. She thought about it for 3 days and decided that the most honest response she could give him was the one she was already living the estate, running properly. The tenants treated fairly, the land developed honestly. Her name on documents she had earned the right to sign, and that sending it in writing would only diminish it. She left the letter in the drawer. She went back to work. Christmas came quietly. Bess went home to her family for 4 days and came back with a jar of her mother's preserves and the information that half of Harlan County was talking about the railroad development and the other half was talking about Mrs. Carter specifically, which Evelyn received with the same equanimity she received most information noted. Filed, moved on. Harrison came to the estate on Christmas morning with a bottle of good bourbon and a land survey map of the northern boundary that he had marked up himself with annotations she had asked for 2 weeks ago, and he had not mentioned since. He set the map on the study desk and she looked at it and then at him. "You did this yourself," she said. "I had time," he said. "This is 2 weeks of evenings," she said. "I had evenings," he said. "And the bourbon is for both of us, not just you. So don't put it in a cabinet." She did not put it in a cabinet. They sat in the study and drank bourbon and went over the survey annotations and argued pleasantly about the eastern slope retaining structure, which Harrison thought could be simplified and which Evelyn was not yet convinced about. And Bess brought them supper at 7 without being asked, because she had developed, over the past 2 months, a precise and affectionate understanding of how things worked in this house. It was the best Christmas Evelyn could remember. She did not say that out loud. She thought it was probably visible anyway. January brought the first real test. The Hargrove mill, not hers, the county mill, owned by James Hargrove, caught fire on a Tuesday night. No one was hurt, but the damage was significant, and the mill was the primary processing point for grain from 6 properties, including 3 of her eastern field families. Without it, the spring yield had nowhere to go. Evelyn heard about it at dawn on Wednesday from Elias Cooper, who arrived at her door with his hat in his hands and the particular controlled distress of a man who has worked out the consequences of a problem and does not like what he found. "The Hargrove boy says it'll be 4 months before they can rebuild," Elias said. "Maybe 5. That takes us right through the spring harvest." "I know," she said. "Come in." She put him at the kitchen table and put coffee in front of him and stood at the counter and thought about it. Not the fire itself that was done, that couldn't be changed, but the shape of what it created and what could be put in its place. "The old processing shed on the north field," she said. "What's its current state?" Elias frowned. "Hasn't been used in 3 seasons. The wheel mechanism's gone, but the structure is sound, far as I know." She thought about the mill wheel she had ordered in November, the one that was sitting in a storage yard in Lexington, waiting for spring installation on the estate's own mill. She thought about scale. She thought about whether what she was considering was practical, or whether she was letting the problem make the decision for her. She thought the tenants need a solution now, not when it's convenient. "I'm going to talk to Harrison about temporarily repurposing the north field shed," she said. "If the wheel can be adapted and the structure reinforced, we may be able to process for Hargrove's affected properties through the spring." Elias stared at her. "You'd do that?" "It's not generosity," she said. "If your families can't process your yield, you can't pay your rents. And if you can't pay your rents, I have a cash flow problem. This is practical." He looked at her for a long moment. "Mrs. Carter," he said, "you keep telling us everything you do is practical." "It is," she said. "Yes, ma'am," he said, "but the way you do it is something else." She didn't answer that. She poured him more coffee and went to write to Harrison. Harrison came that afternoon. He walked the north field shed with her and the engineer she had sent for a man named Graves, who had done the original mill wheel assessment, and he did not say yes, and he did not say no until Graves had finished his evaluation. which Evelyn respected, because it was what she would have done. Graves said it was possible. More work than ideal. Not cheap. Do it, Evelyn said. Harrison looked at her. You're taking on a significant expense. I know what I'm taking on, she said. The Northfield families are 3 of my 5 tenant agreements. If Hargrove's delay runs into the harvest, those families take a loss they can't absorb. The cost of the adaptation is less than the cost of a bad season for the tenants and what that does to the agreements we've built. She met his gaze. I'm protecting the investment. You're also protecting 6 families, he said quietly. Those aren't different things, she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then I'll put in for half the adaptation cost. Against the rail development proceeds when they come through. She looked at him. You don't have to. I know I don't have to, he said. I want to. There's a difference. He held her gaze. You told me that once, I believe. She had said something like it. She thought about saying no. She was practiced at saying no to offers that came with costs she hadn't calculated. But this offer came from a man who had been sitting in her study on Christmas evening, marking up survey maps with his own hand. And she had been learning, slowly and not without difficulty, that accepting help from someone you trusted was not the same thing as needing rescue. Half, she said, and I record it formally in the estate accounts. I'd expect nothing less, he said. The work on the Northfield shed took 3 weeks. Graves brought 2 additional men, and they worked through the cold with the focused efficiency of people who have been told a deadline matters and have decided to take it seriously. Evelyn checked progress every other day, not to supervise. Graves did not need supervising, but because it was her project, and she needed to understand what she was building. By the 3rd week, the shed was operational. The first day it ran. Elias Cooper brought his family's grain through at first light and stood watching the wheel turn with an expression that Evelyn did not look at too long because it had the quality of something private. Ruth Cooper brought a basket of cornbread and left it on the shed's work table without comment, which was its own kind of comment, by the end of February. 4 of Hargrove's 6 affected properties were using the Northfield shed for processing. Word got around. Word always got around. The twist came in March. She had not been expecting it, which was perhaps the point of twists, that they arrive, precisely when you have stopped expecting them. When the ground has felt solid, long enough that you have stopped checking it. A man named Whitfield arrived from Richmond on a Monday. He was not a solicitor, and he was not a surveyor, and he was not connected to the railroad investment or the Carver proceedings, or any of the threads she was currently managing. He was a land agent, he said, representing a consortium of Richmond investors who were interested in acquiring Kentucky properties, in advance of the rail line announcement. He came to the estate. He asked to see Mrs. Carter. She saw him in the study. He made his offer in under 5 minutes, which she gave him credit for. She respected efficiency. The consortium wanted to purchase the railroad land outright. The figure he named was significant. It was also, she noted, approximately 60% of what she had estimated the land would be worth post-announcement. She looked at him across the desk. Who is the consortium, she said. He gave her 4 names. She did not recognize 3 of them. The 4th she recognized, because she had seen it in Haverford's audit documentation. In connection with a financial structure she had spent 2 months helping to unwind. Mr. Whitfield, she said carefully. One of the parties you've named was a co-investor in a transaction that is currently the subject of a fraud complaint in Richmond court. He did not react. Practiced stillness. I wouldn't know anything about that, he said. No, she said. I don't imagine you would. She looked at him directly. The land is not for sale. Mrs. Carter, the figure I've offered is not the question, she said. The question is who I'm selling to and why, and the answers to both of those questions are not satisfactory. She stood. Thank you for coming. Whitfield looked at her for a moment. Something shifted in his manner, not threatening, but harder. The quality of a man who has delivered an offer and is not accustomed to having it declined. You should be aware, he said, that there are other ways to acquire land in this county. Legal ways that don't require the current owner's cooperation. She looked at him. She thought about every document she had filed in the past 4 months. Every proceeding, every filing, every signature, every formally documented decision. She thought about Grayfield and Harrison and Judge Abernathy and Haverford and Fairfield and the entire architecture of legal protection. She had spent 4 months building around what was hers. I am aware of the legal mechanisms available in this county, she said. I am also aware of how they work and who administers them. She held his gaze. You are welcome to pursue whatever avenue you believe is available to you. I will be pursuing mine. She opened the study door. He left. She stood in the hall for a moment after she heard the front door close. Then she went and wrote 3 letters. 1 to Grayfield, 1 to Harrison, 1 to Robert Fairfield. All 3 letters said the same thing in different registers. They're not done. Here is what happened. Here is what I think it means. Here is what I need. She sealed all 3 and sent Bess to town with them before noon. Harrison arrived that evening, with Grayfield 20 minutes behind him. She had the Whitfield conversation documented in her own hand by the time they got their dates. Exact phrasing, the name she had recognized, the implied threat at the end. Grayfield read it twice, Harrison read it once. The 4th name, Harrison said. Thornton. Yes, she said. He was Carver's silent partner, Grayfield said. The firm withdrew from the railroad investment, but the partnership structure was never formally dissolved. He has standing to, he paused. This is more complicated than a land offer. I know, she said. He may be trying to establish grounds for a competing claim on the land, Grayfield said. If he can connect the original purchase to the Whitmore estate fraudulent transactions and argue that the clear title was improperly granted. Can he? Harrison said. Grayfield was quiet for a moment. The title is sound. But a challenge would require a court response, and court responses take time and time. Time is what they want, Evelyn said. If the title is in contest when the rail line is announced, the development agreement with Bledsoe becomes complicated. They want to delay long enough to either force a sale or complicate the development until I have to bring in outside capital on their terms. Both men looked at her. That's what this is, she said. Whitfield wasn't making an offer. He was delivering a message. Grayfield straightened. Then we file preemptively. Document the conversation formally. Establish the implied threat as a matter of record. And file a motion confirming title validity before they can mount a challenge. He looked at her. It means moving this week. Move this week, she said. He left to begin drafting. She and Harrison sat in the study. You knew when he said Thornton's name, Harrison said. I recognized it, she said. And you stayed calm. I stayed useful, she said. That's different from calm. I was not calm. He looked at her. Are you now? She thought about it honestly. No, she said. But I'm clear. That's enough to work with. He leaned forward. Evelyn, this is not going to be easy. If Thornton is serious about a challenge, I have survived considerably worse than a land challenge from a man who couldn't get what he wanted through a front door, she said. I survived 18 months alone. I survived Nathaniel walking through that door with another woman. I survived a shell account and an abandonment filing and a courthouse proceeding and a winter mill fire and a Christmas that I managed largely on my own. She met his eyes. I will survive Edmund Carver's silent partner. Harrison looked at her for a long, steady moment. You will. We will, she said. If you're still in. I was never out, he said. Grayfield filed on Thursday. The motion was precise, comprehensive, and as Grayfield put it in his measured professional way, difficult to argue with, which was how he preferred his filings. Judge Abernathy reviewed it on Friday and issued a preliminary confirmation of title validity the same day. which was faster than anyone had expected, and which Evelyn suspected had something to do with the fact that Judge Abernathy had been at a dinner 4 months ago and had formed his own opinions about the parties involved. Thornton's legal representative filed a formal challenge on the following Monday. And then it was a legal proceeding, which meant it moved at the pace. Legal proceedings moved not fast. Not the river-grade speed of the past 4 months. But steady, the grinding methodical forward motion of a process that could not be hurried, but also could not stop it was properly in motion. Fairfield sent 2 of his Richmond lawyers. Bledsoe's firm sent a formal statement of the development agreement's validity. Harrison provided a deposition. Evelyn provided everything else. The hearing was set for April. In the weeks leading up to it, something happened that Evelyn had not expected and had not prepared for, which was that people started arriving. Not lawyers. Not investors. People. Elias Cooper came to Grayfield's office to give a formal statement about the Northfield shed and what it had meant to 6 families through the winter. Ruth Cooper came with him and gave her own statement, which was shorter than Elias's and considerably more direct. Thomas Eccles, the wedding witness, came forward again not because Evelyn asked him, but because he had heard what was happening, and he was a man who remembered things and thought they mattered. Margaret Hargrove, whose husband's mill had been rebuilt by March with faster-than-expected labor because 3 of Evelyn's Eastern Field tenants had volunteered time on the reconstruction, wrote a letter to Judge Abernathy that she delivered herself. Bess, who was 18 now, and had grown into herself considerably over the winter, told Evelyn quietly that she had told her mother, and her mother had told her church circle, and the church circle had apparently told everyone they knew, and that Evelyn should probably be aware that the general sentiment of a significant portion of Harlan County was that the Thornton challenge was an outrage, and that people were not shy about saying so. Evelyn sat with all of this. She had built something. She had not fully understood, while she was building it, that it was visible from outside, that other people could see it and understand what it was and choose to stand near it. She had been so focused on the construction that she had not looked up often enough to notice the community that had assembled around her. She looked up now. The hearing was on a Tuesday in April. The courthouse was fuller than it needed to be for a land title proceeding, which Judge Abernathy noted with a dry lack of surprise that suggested he had expected exactly this. Thornton's lawyers were good. They were from Richmond and they were expensive, and they had prepared carefully. Their argument was technical and detailed, and built on a reading of the original Whitmore estate transaction that was not, Evelyn acknowledged privately, entirely without logic. Grayfield was better. He laid out the timeline with the precision of a man who has spent 40 years understanding that a legal case is not won by rhetoric, but by sequence, by demonstrating, step by unmistakable step, that the facts do not permit any other conclusion than the one you are asking the court to reach. He called Haverford, who gave his audit testimony with the calm authority of a man who has been doing this for 20 years and is not intimidated by the room. He called Harrison, who gave his deposition in the same still, precise manner. He gave everything without performance, without drama, and with the particular weight of a man whose word in this county meant something. He called Evelyn. She sat in the chair and answered every question Grayfield asked her, and every question Thornton's lawyers asked her. And she answered them all in the same voice, not loud, not heated, not the voice of a woman defending herself, but the voice of a woman stating facts she knows to be true and is not uncertain about and does not need to perform certainty about, because certainty, when it is real, does not require performance. Thornton's lead attorney was a man named Marsh who was skilled and knew it, and believed that knowing it was sufficient advantage. He asked her 6 questions designed to establish that the clear title proceeding had been hasty and inadequately examined. She answered all 6 with specific dates, document reference numbers, and the names of the county officials who had reviewed each stage. Marsh asked a 7th question, whether she believed she could have managed the estate's recovery without external assistance. She looked at him. I managed the estate alone for 18 months under conditions considerably more difficult than those I have faced since, she said. The assistance I received subsequently was assistance I sought strategically and negotiated fairly. There is a difference between help freely given between equals and dependency. She held his gaze. I understand that distinction, Mr. Marsh. I would encourage you to consider it. The room was very quiet. Judge Abernathy looked at his desk and then looked up and said, "Thank you, Mrs. Carter." The ruling came at the end of the hearing. Not in 3 days, not in a week, Judge Abernathy was a man who had arrived at his conclusions before the proceeding was over and saw no point in theatrical delay. He ruled from the bench. The title was valid. The challenge was dismissed. The development agreement stood. Thornton's lawyers gathered their papers. The room exhaled. Evelyn sat still for a moment after the ruling. Just a moment. The time it takes to let something real settle into the place where you have been holding some tense. Then Grayfield squeezed her arm, which was the most physically expressive she had ever seen him. And Harrison, who was sitting one row behind her, leaned forward and said quietly, close enough that only she could hear, "Well done." She turned and looked at him. "We," she said. He shook his head slightly. "You," he said. "I helped. You did this." She held his gaze for a moment. Then she nodded once and stood, picked up the leather case, and walked out of the courthouse into an April morning that was the first warm one in months. The kind of morning that arrives like a promise the season is finally keeping. Harrison caught up with her on the steps. He had the particular expression she had come to associate with him when he had decided to say something and was taking the time to say it correctly. The expression of a man for whom precision mattered, even in the things that had nothing to do with land surveys or legal documents. "Evelyn," he said. She stopped. She turned. The town was going about its Tuesday morning around them. Carts and voices and the ordinary life of a place that had been watching her for 4 months with varying degrees of understanding and had arrived. She thought at a reasonably accurate picture. "I have been thinking," Harrison said, "about how to say this correctly for approximately 6 weeks. And," she said, "and I believe the correct thing is simply to say it," he said. "Without structure, which is not my natural approach, but I am attempting to expand my range," she almost smiled. "Go ahead then." He looked at her directly. "I want to marry you," he said. "Not because of the land or the railroad development or the estate or any arrangement that could be described as strategic. Because you are the most," he paused. "Because when I am in a room with you, I understand things I do not understand when I am not in a room with you. Because the past 4 months have been the first in 15 years that I have thought about something other than work. Because you told me once that you stayed with something, because you had built it and you intended to see what became." He held her gaze. "I want to say the same thing to you." The courthouse steps. The April morning. The leather case in her hand and 4 months of everything behind her and whatever came next ahead. She looked at him. She thought about the woman who had stood at a fireplace 4 months ago, wearing a twice-repaired dress, and held herself together while her husband gave her name to someone else. She thought about what that woman had done in the months since, not what had been done for her. Not what had fallen her way, but what she had chosen and built and fought for and earned. She thought about what it meant to choose someone. Not to accept being chosen, not to be grateful for being seen. To look at a person with clear eyes and decide that this is someone worth building something with. "You are a difficult man," she said. "You have mentioned that," he said. "You are also," she said, "the first person who has ever told me not to minimize myself and meant it without wanting something from the not minimizing." He waited. "And you marked up those survey maps by hand," she said. "For 2 weeks of evenings, without telling me. That's a low bar," he said. "It isn't," she said. "You'd be surprised what a bar it is." She looked at him for a long, still moment. "Yes," she said. He was quiet. "Yes," she said again. "Clearly. I will marry you, on terms we agree on in writing." With Grayfield present, because I have learned the value of clear documentation. Something moved through Harrison Caldwell's face, the full, unguarded expression of a man who has stopped holding himself at a careful distance from something he wants. I would expect nothing less, he said. She nodded once. She picked up the leather case more firmly. Come to the estate this evening, she said. We have a development timeline to review, and now apparently a marriage agreement to draft. I'll bring the survey notes, he said. I'll have Bess make supper, she said. She walked down the steps. She walked into the April morning with the leather case under her arm and the ruling in her pocket and the full weight of what she had built around her, not as a burden, as a thing you carry because it is yours and you made it, and it has become, over months of deliberate and difficult work, the shape of who you are. The railroad line was announced in May. The land north of the county line, her land, confirmed and clear and properly documented, was exactly where Bledsoe had said it would be needed. The development broke ground in June. Graves brought his crew. Pitt supervised the survey. The retaining structure on the eastern slope came in under the revised budget, which Evelyn noted in the ledger with the particular satisfaction of a woman who has learned not to trust first estimates. The Eastern Field families had their best harvest in 3 years. Evelyn renegotiated 2 of the 5 tenant agreements upward, not because she had to, because the yield supported it, and Elias Cooper stood in the north field shed that was now running properly and told her he had never seen a landlord renegotiate in the tenant's favor, and she told him she had never seen a tenant give his time to a neighbor's mill repair, and they stood there for a moment in the mutual recognition of people who have decided to do things properly and found that it works. The wedding was in September. Small. Grayfield officiated. Bess stood up with Evelyn. Robert Fairfield came from Richmond and shook Harrison's hand for a very long time and said nothing, which was everything. Amelia sent flowers and a letter that made Evelyn sit down for a moment, because it was that good and that honest, and that full of a young woman growing into something real. Judge Abernathy came. Margaret Hargrove came. Thomas Eccles came and shook Evelyn's hand and said he had never been so glad he could remember a date clearly, which made her laugh, a real laugh, the kind that surprises you. She wore the green dress, not the twice-repaired one. A new one, made by a seamstress in town, who had heard about the courthouse hearing and had offered, and whom Evelyn had paid properly for the work, because that was how she did things. She wore it, and she stood beside Harrison Caldwell in the front room of the estate that was hers, and she said the words clearly, and without trembling, and without any of the uncertainty she had felt the first time. She had said words like these in a room like this, because she was not the woman she had been then. She knew exactly what she was choosing. She knew exactly what it was worth. By the end of that year, the Northfield Shed had been formalized as a permanent processing cooperative for 6 county properties. Evelyn had drafted the charter herself and had Grayfield file it properly and had set the governance structure so that no single property, including her own, held a controlling share. It was, she told Harrison, the most useful thing she had built, because it would outlast any single season and any single dispute and any single person's willingness to show up. He looked at the charter when she showed it to him. You built an institution, he said. I built a practical solution, she said. That happens to last. He looked at her. Most people don't think that far ahead. Most people, she said, haven't spent 18 months managing something alone and learned how quickly things fall apart without proper structure. He folded the charter and handed it back to her. I love you, he said. Simple, direct. The way he said the things that mattered most without preamble, without decoration, with the full weight of a man who does not say things he does not mean. She looked at him. I know, she said, I love you too. She put the charter in the leather case. Now come look at the Eastfield drainage proposal. Graves thinks we can increase the spring yield by 30% with the right modification, and I want your opinion before I authorize the expense. He followed her to the desk. The evening settled around them, the fire, the ledgers, the maps, the leather case on the corner of the desk, worn soft from 4 years of her hand, and they worked. Side by side, the way they had gotten into the habit of working, which was to say, as equals, with full attention, without either of them pretending the other needed less than they did or deserved less than they had earned. Outside, the estate moved in its autumn rhythms. The harvest was in. The railroad construction was on schedule. The processing cooperative was running. The tenant agreements were holding. The land was hers, and the name on its documents was hers, and the life she was living in it was a life she had chosen with clear eyes and steady hands, and the particular unbreakable conviction of a woman who knows what she is worth. Not because someone told her, not because someone chose her. Because she had stood in the ruins of everything she thought she had and built something better with her own hands. And she had done it without asking permission, and she had done it correctly. And it had held. Evelyn Carter had not been saved. Evelyn Carter had done the saving, and everything that came after the man beside her. The land beneath her name, the community that had grown up around what she had built. The morning she would wake to tomorrow, and the one after that, and everyone that followed, was not a reward for surviving. It was the life she had chosen. It was exactly enough. It was hers.